Alone and deprived, the veteran stood on the edge of the abyss, deprived even of life's simplest joys. His days were filled with longing and loss. Every memory of loved ones only intensified the pain in his heart. His military past left him with only one eye and only one functioning ear. Concussion had completely deprived him of his second hearing. He remembered how he received these wounds, but the pride in his comrades' resilience and their joint sacrifice simply did not allow the old man to regret his decision to join the army in that difficult period for the country. The burning in his chest was not caused by old injuries, no. First, his son, Ignacio, perished. The young man confidently followed in his father's footsteps, but fell in battle in a foreign land, so far from home. He and his wife had a hard time at that time, but they coped. They learned to live together with the bitterness of loss. And as if that wasn't enough, years later, Amelia faded away. Cancer crept in too subtly, too quickly. The man watched as his love withered away right in his arms, and he was completely powerless at that moment. And now, being an old man, he remained completely alone. He had neither family nor friends. One cold autumn evening, when the wind was whistling in his ears and the rain was pouring down like from a bucket, Isidro decided to take a walk to the old places. He headed to the memorial where the names of those who did not return from the battle were forever resting. The old man's heart trembled with sorrow and sadness, but pride in his son's bravery softened this nightmare. Suddenly, in the twilight, he noticed the figure of a young man sheltered under a tree. There was something familiar on his face, reminding the old man of his own son. He approached closer and asked, "Young man, what are you doing here in such weather?" He raised his eyes, and their gazes met. In his eyes, the old man saw a reflection of his own loss and pain. "I lost my father in the war," the young man replied. "I often come here to honor his memory." The old man understood that this young man needed support just as much as he did. They sat down on a modest bench under the tree and began to talk. The young man talked about his father, about his dreams and hopes. The old man, on the other hand, remembered his wife, his son, his sorrowful losses. Of course, there was a gap between them, as between all representatives of such different generations, but it didn't bother them at all. On the contrary, the guy, named Miguel, was even more interested in how people lived in times when he was not born yet. That evening marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship between two people united by pain and loss. They decided to meet here every day to support each other, to share those moments of memory that bring such strong pain but are also important for maintaining a connection with the past. The young man respected the old man for his experience and wisdom, and the veteran admired the enthusiasm and energy of the youth. With each meeting, the old man gradually felt that his heart was becoming lighter, that the grief he carried inside was giving way to hope and the warmth of friendship. Together with Miguel, they found the strength to endure loss and move forward. Sometimes for their gatherings under the tree, Isidro brought chess, and sometimes Miguel brought strange board games with complex rules that were unusual for the elderly man. Surprisingly, the old man was interested in figuring them out. For his age, the elderly man possessed an extremely curious and lively mind. But not everything was so smooth. At first, the old man didn't suspect the young man's true motives. He saw him only as someone in need of support, much like himself. They spent a lot of time together, sharing their stories, and the old man began to trust this young man. However, over time, the veteran began to notice something strange in the young man's behavior. He was too curious about his apartment, asking about its location, size, and even the price. Suspicion began to awaken inside the old man, but he tried to push it away, wanting to believe in the good intentions of his new friend. "Miguel, son, don't get me wrong," the man squinted his one eye, "but it's strange how you talk to me. Why do you need to know when my apartment was last renovated?" "Señor Nieto, I just want to know if the living conditions in your area are good." The young man raised his eyebrows and shrugged. "I wanted to move to a quieter neighborhood." "You said your neighbors are very quiet, the streets are always clean, and everything you need is always at hand. I'm listening to you, while mentally calculating the cost, and then separately how much the renovation will cost." Well, of course, I also think about whether it will be comfortable for me to live with the layout, like in your apartment. Maybe I'd be more comfortable in a 3-bedroom? Who knows? However, every time the conversation turned to the apartment, the veteran felt a sense of unease in his heart. He tried to tell himself that it was just his military training that made him see threats where there might not be any. But the doubts didn't leave him. The old man realized that he needed to figure out this situation, but he didn't want to accuse his friend without serious grounds. He decided to leave everything as it was but remain vigilant. After all, he just wanted to believe in the kindness and honesty of his new friend, but something in his behavior made him feel a slight chill down his spine. During one of their walks through the city streets, the young man began to hint that the old man should turn to him for help with financial matters. The old man listened carefully to his words, but inside him, a bell of alarm rang. The young man claimed to know ways to help the old man profit from the government for selling his apartment and ensure his financial stability for the remaining years of his life. He talked about connections with influential people, about the possibility of sorting out all formalities and getting the desired result. Do you really enjoy living in an apartment that's falling apart? You yourself told me that the furniture is slowly breaking, the appliances are going crazy, and there are problems with the plumbing. The old man listened to his words, but doubts swirled in his head. He wondered why the young man was so persistently interested in his financial situation and was willing to help him for free. An inner voice told him that something was wrong here. The old man understood that decisions in this situation needed to be made with caution. He decided not to give a final answer to the young man and instead said he would think about his offer. After deep thought, the old man realized that he needed to carefully consider the situation and be prepared for any possible consequences before making any decisions. But, after a couple of days, when the sink in the kitchen got clogged again and the cupboard door crashed to the floor with a bang, he gave in. Even though Isidro had little time left to live, he still wanted to end his days in comfort and coziness. And that was the veteran's biggest mistake. The young man, who turned out to be a fraudster, was willing to employ any depraved methods to achieve his goal. He conducted a thorough analysis of the situation and found a legal loophole that could be exploited to bankrupt the old man and strip him of his apartment. The fraudster, examining the old man's situation, discovered that he had some tax and utility debts. Using this knowledge, he found a loophole in the legislation that involved the forced sale of the debtor's property to settle his debts. The fraudster meticulously researched the laws and procedures related to evicting the old man from his apartment and selling it at auction. He noted the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the old man and decided to exploit them for his selfish purposes. Utilizing his legal expertise and connections with influential individuals, the fraudster arranged for the old man to be declared a debtor, and his apartment was put up for auction. He ensured that the selling price of the apartment was significantly below its market value. The fraudster employed various manipulations and pressured governmental structures to ensure the successful execution of his nefarious plan. He was willing to do whatever it took to benefit from this situation, even if it meant causing indescribable suffering to the old man. Thus, the legal loophole the fraudster found involved using the old man's debts to forcibly sell his apartment at a reduced price. This cunning plan allowed the fraudster to achieve his goal and deprive the old man of his only sanctuary and source of stability. The old man, being honest and unsuspecting, was completely unprepared for such levels of deceit and cruelty. He could not fathom that someone could stoop so low as to exploit his vulnerable position for their own gain. When the fraudster executed his cunning plan, the old man was literally thrown out onto the street, deprived of his only shelter and documents. This terrible turn of events left him in complete despair, lost and defenseless. For Isidro, it was a blow from which it was very difficult to recover. He felt betrayed and deceived, trapped by the fraudster who ruthlessly exploited his weaknesses and vulnerabilities. A sense of helplessness and hopelessness overwhelmed the old man, but along with them, a fire of anger was ignited within him. Anger at the world, which not only took everything he had, but also continued to trample him underfoot. Anger at himself for allowing himself to trust a young man without seeing his true intentions. And finally, anger at the young man, who mercilessly destroyed his last shreds of dignity and peace. Scoundrel! Pup! With bitterness and resentment in his voice, the old man muttered as he tossed and turned on the hard cot in the homeless shelter. I fought for a better life for people like him. For the youth to have a peaceful sky above their heads. Old fool, you suspected. Look where your trust has led you. Workers from charitable foundations, who owned the shelters where the old man often stayed, simply shrugged. The only thing they could do was provide shelter and modest food to those in need. They listened to Isidro's story but couldn't say anything in response. They didn't know what to do in such cases, nor did they know where to turn. Every new day became a real trial for the old man. He woke up in his lonely world, where the walls of the shelter seemed too tight and memories of his past were too heavy. The struggle with pain became increasingly difficult as he remembered his days in battle and the losses he had faced. Vivid images of his beloved wife and deceased son constantly flashed before his eyes, like ghosts haunting him. One day, Isidro had a simultaneously beautiful and disturbing dream. At first, he saw his dear Amelia in it. In this vision, she looked as if she had never been plagued by illness. Rosy-cheeked, with sparkling eyes, she smiled at him and reached out her hands. Isidro, worn out by constant struggle for survival, went towards her, and suddenly his steps became so light that he felt 40 years younger. Amelia continued to beckon her husband, luring him away, gradually moving further from him. The man couldn't see where, because of the bright light shining directly into his eyes from his wife's silhouette. He only felt with all his heart that it was good there. But the light suddenly became dim. From somewhere behind, the noise and roar echoed. Isidro froze in place, as did Amelia. It was the rumble of war. These were gunshots, explosions, people's screams. It was the rumble of heavy machinery and the roar of aircraft engines. Suddenly, someone grabbed the old man by the shoulders and turned him around. With amazement, he looked into the face of Ignacio, who was clearly furious with his father. You can't run away from the field. There was no order to retreat, he shouted, shaking the old man by the chest. There was an order to hold positions. Are you still hearing orders, Dad? You're not deaf yet, huh? Son? You'll rest later, when the time comes. Just not now, it's still too early, the young man's face changed. It's not time yet. Do you hear me? Isidro nodded sharply. He didn't fully understand what his son meant, but he decided to support him. The old man turned his shoulder and saw Amelia's smile slowly fading from her face. Her gaze became mournful, filled with deepest sorrow. She pressed her hands to herself, and the light behind her began to fade gradually. Ignacio shook his father again, not letting him relax. The young soldier pressed his forehead against his father's, clutching the hair on the back of his head. I'll be back, tomorrow or in the next life. Isidro saw tears streaming down his son's cheeks. Tomorrow or in the next life. But you have nothing to do here, Lieutenant. With these words, Ignacio forcefully pushed his father into the abyss that appeared out of nowhere right behind him. The light was getting further away, and the rumble of war gradually subsided. Falling into the unknown, the old man felt deep resignation. Strangely, he wasn't afraid. He felt almost nothing. And then, finding himself in complete darkness and silence, he shuddered through his whole body. What's the matter, Doc? The old man looked around and saw Mingo, a vagabond who often stayed at the shelter. He put his hand on the veteran's shoulder and stared into his lone eye intently. Isidro realized he had woken up. After shuffling a bit on his cot, the man sat up, tiredly rubbing his nose. He felt beaten and weary. He hadn't rested at all during the night. Mingo, the vagabond, obviously expected some sort of response from the old man, so Isidro decided to reassure his neighbor. Nothing, buddy. Just a strange dream. Mingo shrugged but didn't rush to turn away. His face showed that he didn't entirely believe old Isidro. His friend seemed too troubled. These two occasionally exchanged a few words, briefly and without much detail. Mingo simply liked to chat, and Isidro, though too proud to admit it, needed someone to talk to. That's how they lived. They would meet at various shelters, discuss recent events in their lives, and then quickly go their separate ways. Mingo was a breezy man. He himself said he never aspired to any lofty success. Mother used to whack me for getting DS in school. Dad left us when I was little, so Mom had it tough with me. The vagabond chuckled every time he remembered his childhood. I don't even remember going to school like other kids. Mother tried to explain to me that I was born special. Back then, I took it as a compliment, but now I understand I've been a bit of a fool since birth. That must have been an unpleasant discovery, right? Ha! It would have been if I cared. Stupid, smart, brilliant, Mingo threw his hands behind his head and stretched. We all end up in the same ground. So what's the difference? Look, Doc, I have no home, no car, no wife and kids. Sometimes I have nothing to eat, and sometimes the sole of my only pair of boots falls off. Yet, I'm still happy. I'm just as free as the wind in the field, and that makes me happy. Maybe it's all because of my inherent stupidity. Isidro paused for a moment. He gazed into the distance, contemplating the fate of this man. The old man marveled at Mingo's ability to find joy in every little thing. He couldn't understand how Mingo managed to find positives in every situation. Not that Isidro was particularly despondent or pessimistic, but as an elderly man, he definitely wished to live in entirely different circumstances. The old man longed to return to his weathered but beloved apartment. He wanted to drink coffee in the mornings and sit in his favorite chair with an interesting book in the evenings. He missed the photographs of his wife Amelia and their son Ignacio terribly. He suddenly realized how petty his complaints about his past life were when there were people nearby who were happy just to exist. You know, Domingo, the old man smiled for the first time in a long while, you truly are special. The Lord has blessed you with a happiness that lasts a lifetime. Not everyone can boast such a gift. Mingo laughed in response. The men raised their mugs of tasteless coffee and drank to all the good things they had. Isidro found himself even more drawn to the company of this carefree vagabond. Perhaps Mingo could barely read, didn't know any literary works, and couldn't flaunt knowledge, but the old man couldn't deny that instead of diplomas and doctoral degrees, Mingo had acquired something more important. Simple worldly wisdom. A couple of months after that conversation, Domingo passed away. Isidro woke up and glanced at his neighbor, feeling somewhat unaccustomed. Usually, the vagabond always woke up before the old man and eagerly shared any news he had. But this time, he simply lay on his makeshift bed. The veteran awkwardly got up from his stiff cot, stretched a bit, and looked again at his neighbor. He remained motionless, not stirring. "Mijo?" In response, silence buzzed in the old man's ears, stark against the general hubbub of the shelter. Still unaware of what had happened, a chill ran down the pensioner's spine. He rushed to his friend and immediately pulled the worn-out sheet from his head. Underneath, Isidro saw Mijo's face, serene and lifeless, already drained of color. His features were completely relaxed, wrinkles smoothed, and eyelids softly closed. The old man froze, unable to move. He continued to stare at his now lifeless companion. "Oh, Mijo." Even in death, the vagabond's face was lit by a gentle smile, the same one he carried through his unfortunately short life. Later, the charity workers shared with the old man that his friend had died of a heart attack. Just like that, quietly, without fuss or pain. A friend. Perhaps, over the years, Isidro had indeed had a true friend by his side. He needed nothing from the old man except a listening ear for his cheerful, albeit sometimes shocking, childhood stories. He couldn't bring himself to attend the funeral. It turned out Mijo had nephews who knew about their wayward uncle. And Mijo himself knew them well. He simply didn't want to live like other people. The man decided not to cross paths with his friend's relatives to avoid unnecessary questions. It was just too hard for him to talk about the vagabond Mijo. A couple of days later, Isidro went to the cemetery, to the modest grave marked with a scribbled number. He said nothing. He simply ran his wrinkled hand over the small cold stone and looked at the epitaph, on which, besides the dates of birth and death, kind people had engraved the phrase Isidro had said to them. Surprisingly, the nephews decided not to change anything, just agreeing with the recommendations of some random fellow from the shelter. Apparently, they knew what kind of person their uncle was too. And I am still happy this was the phrase that completely described the man's life. Before leaving, the old man left an old, rusted metal keychain in the shape of a smiling heart near the tombstone, which had fallen from the stretcher as Domingo's lifeless body was carried away. The old man believed that his duty was to fight, even if the world was unfair to him. He didn't ask for sympathy or help from the youth. All his life, he preferred to go his own way, despite all the difficulties and trials he had to endure. Domingo taught him not to get upset over trivial matters. Yes, Isidro was poor and lonely. But he lived, breathed this air, looked at this blue sky. However, with each passing day, his physical strength diminished and his health deteriorated. Battle scars and the consequences of injuries sustained during the years of war became an unbearable burden for his aging body. His lone eye and deaf ears served as reminders of how much had changed since he was young and strong. Yet, despite all the hardships, the old man continued to fight, refusing to surrender to old age and illness. He never imagined that a chance encounter with a vagabond would awaken such a strange will to live in the old veteran. Deprived of his only shelter and wandering from one shelter to another, the veteran exemplified resilience and perseverance. He took any job offered at the employment center, regardless of his age and physical difficulties. However, despite all the hardships, he stubbornly rejected offers of assistance and care in nursing homes. Over the years of roaming the city streets, the old man became increasingly withdrawn and proud. His life experience and resilience made him too unyielding to accept help from young nurses and caregivers. He believed that the youth should not burden themselves with caring for frail old men and preferred to remain independent and self-reliant. For him, it was not just a matter of pride, but also a matter of perception of the world. A man whose youth was spent in inhumane conditions of wartime could not accept the idea that his less than healthy condition warranted attention and care from the younger generation. His view of the world was marked by firmness and steadfastness, and he preferred to fight for his existence independently, without relying on others. One day, when there was no work at the employment center, and there wasn't enough money even for the simplest meal, the old man felt a hunger that persistently demanded satisfaction. The shelters were also overcrowded. There simply wasn't enough food for everyone. He realized he needed to eat something to alleviate the pain in his stomach. Struggling to move through the streets, the old man began picking up coins from the ground in alleys, despite his fatigue and physical difficulties. Each coin was valuable to him, each one brought him closer to the possibility of buying something edible. And their number slightly increased. The old man found himself in front of the counter of a small store, where freshly baked buns and bread on the shelves caught his eye. The feeling of hunger became unbearable, but in the old man's pockets lay only a few coins that he had hardly collected during the day in the alleys. He approached the counter slowly, his back rounded, and his steps uncertain, as if each step cost him tremendous effort. Isidro took one bun and began contemplating his motives, his situation. And what did his conscience say about it? What am I, reduced to theft? The old man thought to himself. You lived on a couple of spoonfuls of water a day, on half a dry biscuit a week. Look at yourself, what a mess. The old man was only ashamed of himself for such thoughts even crossing his mind. He suddenly shuddered at the idea that he had almost stolen the most ordinary bun from the store. He sighed heavily, more as a reproach to himself, and prepared to put the extra bun back on the counter, casting his gaze downward. It was at that moment, as he was about to place it back, that he heard a rustle and felt heavy gazes upon him. Turning around, he saw a young and stern security guard looking at him suspiciously and approaching. "What are you doing here?" asked the guard with a displeased expression on his face. "I would like to buy this bun," Isidro replied, his voice weak and trembling. "Why did you take two then, if you only wanted to buy one?" the guard asked, not taking his eyes off. "But I put the second one back, didn't I? Right?" Isidro stuttered, trying to explain the situation. He felt that every word he said only aroused more suspicion. The guard insisted that Isidro took two buns, but intended to pay for only one. Isidro's heart beat faster. He felt ashamed and hurt by being suspected of dishonesty. He silently handed the unbought bun to the guard, but the guard just nodded his head and pointed to the door. "Come with me." Isidro turned slowly and approached the security guard, feeling the bitterness of insult and pain gripping his heart. He realized that there was no place for the weak and poor in this world, and that he would have to fight even harder to survive. During the search of the old man's pockets, the guards unexpectedly found two valuable items that initially didn't catch their attention: a metal fork combat merit and a yellowed piece of paper folded into a tiny square. Tentatively unfolding the paper, they saw an old, time-stained child's drawing. The drawing depicted a soldier standing next to a woman and a child. In the background was a depiction of a house. The soldier had his hand on the woman's shoulder, and the child, hugging his leg, smiled happily. The inscription on the drawing read, "My daddy is a hero." The guards' gazes shifted from the drawing to the old man's face. In his remaining eye, they could read the thorny paths he had traveled and boundless sorrow. It became clear at that moment that life circumstances had led him to this position, far from his own mistakes or shortcomings. The guards felt horror at how they had erred in judging the old man and subjecting him to humiliation. They realized that this person standing before them was not just a stranger but a hero whose sacrifices and sufferings deserved respect and recognition. "So you are a veteran?" One of the guards nervously coughed into his fist, asking. But Isidro only nodded silently, unable to say anything to them. With understanding and regret, they returned the medal and the drawing to the old man. The guards decided to help him, at least to the extent they could do it right now. It was obvious that the elderly man was very hungry. This was evident from the modest bun he held in his hands for a long time in front of the counter, and from his gaunt figure. Explaining the situation to their chief, the guards asked for a brief leave from their post. They escorted the old man to the nearest cafe and paid for his meal. "Take whatever you want," one of them began, placing a hand on the frail back of the pensioner. "Please forgive us, it's all because of our job, we have to keep an eye on everything. Surely, you know yourself how many scoundrels roam this earth." The old man gratefully smiled at them, looking into their faces with eyes full of gratitude. At that moment, a spark of hope ignited in his heart that perhaps there were still good people in this world, ready to help those in need of assistance and support. After the guards realized their mistake, upon returning from the cafe, they invited the old man into the staff room to better understand his situation and learn about his life. Inside the room, silence reigned, interrupted only by the sound of the swinging pendulum on the wall and the quiet steps of the guards accompanying the old man. "Please, have a seat, Lieutenant." A young man named Pedro placed the first available chair in front of the old man. "Tell us, what happened to you? Why is a hero like yourself forced to survive rather than live?" Sitting on a dilapidated chair, the old man began to tell his story. He spoke of his service in the army, his family, the losses, and the sufferings he endured. His voice was quiet but filled with bitterness and sorrow. Each word sounded like a heartbeat, filled with pain and hope for justice. "And, in the end, I, old and lonely, encountered a swindler." At this point, the veteran's voice trembled with bitterness. "I hoped I had found a friend with whom I could share the weight of loss and the burden of loneliness, but he had entirely different plans. He deceived me, took everything I had, and that was that." Listening to his story, the young men couldn't contain their anger. They clenched their fists, feeling the rage build against those who dared to mistreat such a person. This man, who once fought for the welfare of the country, was once a hero, but now found himself lonely and vulnerable, struck by such a despicable blow from scammers. Pedro's father fought around the same time as the deceased Señor Nieto, so the story of the maimed veteran touched him more deeply than the others. He couldn't imagine for a second that his father would end up wandering the streets, suffering from hunger and cold. Completely alone, completely unwanted. As if forgotten by the whole world. The women in the room couldn't hold back their tears. Many of those present had elderly grandfathers, or even fathers, of a venerable age. They were the most beloved people in the world to them. And now before them sat the most miserable person they had ever seen. When Isidro's story reached the beggar Mingo, everyone present heard a quiet sob, carrying sincere pity and regret within it. "Señor Nieto, don't run away from us," Andrea, tearfully, managed to utter. "You're a proud man, that's obvious. You even told us yourself. Please, don't disappear anywhere, we'll help you." The young men, who were the first to get acquainted with the veteran, vowed to do everything possible to help the old man. They promised to help him restore his rights and reclaim his home, which was unlawfully taken from him. They promised not to leave him in trouble and to support him as soon as they could. The women present, in turn, began to worry about current problems that could be addressed right away. "My room is empty now. I used to live with my son, but he grew up, got married, and has his own house, his own family." Carmen, the accountant, who was no longer young herself, suddenly began from afar. "You can stay with me for a while. We won't bother each other. I'll be at work during the day, and in the evening, we'll each have our own room. It's better than sleeping in a shelter under thin sheets, isn't it? And I'm updating my husband's wardrobe. We were looking for a place to put the old clothes. Don't think they're bad, they're just too big for my husband now," Luisa began to justify, offering a cup of coffee to the elderly person. "And you, even though you're quite thin now, you were undoubtedly robust in your youth. His clothes might fit you. We don't mind. It would be a waste to throw them away." The old man smiled gratefully at them, feeling somewhat relieved that there were people willing to help him. In this world where he felt betrayed and forgotten, suddenly there were kind souls ready to lend him a helping hand. He hadn't sought help deliberately, enduring his sad existence in solitude, but this was a small light in the darkness, giving the old man hope for a better future. After a serious conversation with the pensioner and realizing the gravity of his situation, the store workers decided to do everything possible to help him regain a dignified life. Gathering together, they discussed a plan of action. One of the first steps was to gather more information about the old man. They decided to check the veteran's database to find his name and military service history. When they found his records, it became clear to them that the old man was indeed a veteran who had served his country with honor and bravery. Photographs from his younger days only confirmed this: confident facial features, proud posture, and a determined gaze. Even more recent photos, where the man had already been wounded and retired, emitted such powerful energy and thirst for life that it touched the hearts of the young people, realizing that this soldier was now leading a miserable existence. Inspired by his story and desire to help, the store workers embarked on more active actions. They contacted local veterans organizations and charitable foundations to find out how they could help the old man return to his home and provide him with support. Furthermore, they organized fundraising among the store employees and reached out to communities on social media for assistance. Their initiative garnered widespread response, and people were eager and somewhat proud to help a veteran who found himself in such a difficult situation. With each passing day, support for the old man grew. He felt less lonely and helpless, knowing that he was being supported and helped to return to a dignified life. The Veterans Foundation provided him with contacts of other men who had served with him at the same time. Some of them lived with their families, while others enjoyed life in retirement homes among other dear old folks. For now, Isidro used Carmen's computer to communicate with them, as she liked to have a cup of coffee with the old man in the evenings and listen to his life stories. Volunteers promised to buy Isidro a phone as soon as his new documents were processed. The Veterans Foundation immediately responded to the situation with the pensioner and organized a fundraiser to assist him. Thanks to the generosity and support of people who believed in the importance of supporting veterans, the funds were raised quite quickly. One of the first steps was to restore the pensioner's lost documents. The Veterans Foundation collaborated with competent authorities to quickly address this issue. Thanks to their efforts, the elderly man had all the necessary documents confirming his identity and veteran status restored. "Be sure to call me whenever you want." Carmen chirped excitedly in the store, where she had specially gone with the volunteers and Isidro. "You probably would be better off with a button phone. Even touchscreens are tricky for me. Guys, I don't really understand all these models myself, but since you handle the money, pick something more reliable for the pensioner." "Oh, Sonora. Every elderly person needs a friend like you," chuckled one of the volunteers. "To worry like this. Don't worry, we'll choose a model that Senor Nieto can handle. We'll consider his vision and motor skills. You just make sure to be there for him in case he needs help." The woman nodded satisfactorily. Through Isidro, she glimpsed her long-deceased father. Only the timbre of his voice brought Carmen back to those times when she was just a young girl. Now, recalling this pleasant feeling of some sort of familial support, she couldn't tear herself away from this touching old man. "Carmen, what would I do without you?" Isidro smiled. "You've taught me about computers, and now you're getting ready to help with the phone. You're simply an angel, dear." Choosing a phone, considering such a support group, was one of the simplest tasks in Senor Nieto's case. Indeed, the volunteers took into account all the peculiarities of the pensioner they were tasked to take care of. But the public resonance went beyond the usual assistance to a veteran. Isidro's case also caught the interest of law enforcement officials. It turned out that not only Senor Nieto, but many other pensioners in the city had fallen victim to similar acts of fraud. The police began an investigation, and soon photo fits were compiled. It was by these that the criminals, including the same Miguel who deceived Isidro, were apprehended. After the criminals were identified by law enforcement, an investigation began. The police arrested the criminals who had taken documents and an apartment from the old man and charged them. The pensioner felt a sense of justice and satisfaction knowing that those who had caused him so much pain and suffering would finally be held accountable for their actions. The Veterans Foundation also provided financial support for repairing the pensioner's apartment. Thanks to this, the old man could return to his home, which had been unlawfully taken from him. The repairs were done quickly and with quality to create comfortable conditions for the pensioner. Carmen had grown so accustomed to Isidro's company that she even shed a tear when it was time to part with him. Even the old man was touched by such warm affection from a completely unfamiliar woman in distress. They promised to call each other every evening to chat or support each other in moments of sadness, and to visit each other to have coffee together. Furthermore, thanks to the efforts of the fund, the pensioner's right to receive his pension was restored. He was no longer deprived of this important source of income, which allowed him to sustain himself. The Veterans Fund continued to support the old man, providing him with necessary assistance and care so that he could live with dignity and tranquility, as he deserved. It seemed like the story should have ended there, but it didn't. One day, someone knocked on the door. Isidro was greatly surprised because he and Carmen hadn't arranged any meeting. Approaching the door, he saw through the peephole a completely unfamiliar young woman whose features carried some inexplicable melancholic notes. "Hello? Does Senor Nieto live here?" The stranger had a strong Eastern accent, which further puzzled the old man. "I really need to talk. Please, don't send me away." Her appearance seemed unusual and even exotic to the veteran. There was something mysterious and appealing in her facial features and way of dressing. With particular caution, he still opened the door. The man awkwardly shifted from foot to foot, scrutinizing the face of the strange person. "Do you need something?" "Yes and no. You see, this will sound very strange." The girl hesitated and took a deep breath before blurting out, "I'm your granddaughter. Ignacio's daughter." The old man let out a bitter laugh. How absurd. After one scammer, he wasn't going to believe such fairy tales anymore. "Oh, of course. You're my granddaughter, and my son is still alive, drinking cocktails straight from coconuts somewhere on the shores of Sri Lanka. I can prove it," The uninvited guest grabbed the door with her hand, not allowing the man to close it. I have a whole folder with photos, my birth certificate, everything is there. Please, Isidro, look at them. The veteran squinted his only eye. He still regarded the girl's claim skeptically. But for some reason, he decided to let her in and show what she had collected in a whole folder. The girl quickly explained that thanks to the efforts of the Veterans Fund, their story had been heard almost all over the world. From the description of appearance and the unit number, she recognized her grandfather in the tattered old man, whom neither she nor her mother could contact because of the language barrier. It turned out that the veteran's son, who served in the army, was in a romantic relationship with a civilian woman. He was planning a wedding but hadn't had the chance to share this joyful news with his family. Unfortunately, Ignacio died before the celebration, never knowing about his chosen one's pregnancy. And here, this is Dad standing next to Mom. She's already pregnant here, but Dad never found out, the girl noticeably saddened, handing one of the photos to her presumed grandfather. This is my favorite. It radiates the family. Because if you know that Mom was already carrying me in her womb at that time, then you can say that this photo is of our entire family, right? True. The old man looked at the photo, now slightly yellowed with time. Samira had grown up so much. It was hard to believe it had all been real. The pain of betrayal by Miguel still lingered in the old man's heart. He sincerely wanted to believe Samira, but he couldn't. Even the positive experience of friendship with the vagabond Mingo couldn't help the old man open his heart. He remained silent for a long time, looking at the photos, unable to voice his rough, as he thought, suspicions. But suddenly the girl took the old man's hand. Isidro, I don't need anything from you, neither does Mom. She looked into the veteran's eyes. We can do a DNA test. It's okay, I was prepared for this outcome. I can even pay for it myself. I just want you to not be alone. I want you to be part of the family. After all, Dad was your biological son, so you should be with me and Mom. The old man asked for a few days to make a decision. Instead of just leaving, Samira left Isidro her favorite photograph. Only when the girl left did the man decide to hold the photo in his hands. There, on the back, he saw a short inscription that brought out all the unshed tears of sorrow and loneliness. The underline clearly belonged to the late Ignacio, and the inscription read, I'll come back to you, tomorrow or in the next life. The next day, he called Samira to tell her his decision. The girl came to the old man's house to pick him up. In the hospital, they sat in long anticipation of the test results. The doctors, seeing such a strange pair coming for such a strange reason, couldn't contain their surprise. Finally, the doctor appeared in the waiting room, ready to deliver the results. Well, then. The probability of kinship is 81%. I don't know if this is good news for you or not, but you are definitely second-degree biological relatives to each other. Samira warmly smiled at Isidro. She was sure he was her grandfather. But the expression on the man's face was hard to describe in simple words. For the old man, this discovery was a real shock. He never thought his family was looking for him all these years. In his lonely life, there was no place for joy or happiness, and suddenly he found out he had a granddaughter who so desperately wanted to meet him. Overwhelmed with a slight tremble, the old man reached out to the girl and cautiously hugged her. The notes of melancholy he saw in her face were special, completely unique to his late Ignacio. Only now, knowing the test result, Isidro decided to acknowledge it. Meeting his granddaughter became a source of excitement and joy for the old man, feelings he hadn't felt in many years. They shared memories, told each other about their lives and plans for the future. For the old man, it was a moment of true happiness when he felt like a part of the family he had been searching for so long. Thanks to the efforts of the Veterans Fund, his life became filled with new hope and possibilities for a happy future. As the granddaughter talked about her life and how she and her mother had always searched for the old man, she opened up new horizons of family connection and love for him. They spent long hours discussing plans for the future. For the granddaughter, this was also an important moment. She found her grandfather, whom she had heard about for many years but had never seen. Meeting him brought her a sense of completeness and satisfaction. She felt that everything was now in its place. Gradually, the old man began to embrace his new role, the role of a grandfather. He assisted his granddaughter with advice and support, sharing his stories and knowledge. The granddaughter joyfully welcomed him as part of the family, gratefully accepting him into her life. They had big plans ahead for meeting Samira's mother. She hadn't decided to move yet, so approaching the meeting needed careful consideration. However, for some reason, Isidro felt only pleasant anticipation. Not every old man undertakes such a big journey at the age of 85. Carmen, upon hearing the whole story of the granddaughter's arrival, was beside herself with joy. The woman felt peace knowing that her elderly friend now had someone who would never forget about him. Yes, she and Ignacio were close, but nothing could replace genuine family ties. And she was deeply honored when, shortly before leaving, Señor Nieto decided that Samira must meet her. The trio spent an extremely cozy evening together. The atmosphere was warm, almost familial, and at the end, the girl smiled and said she would be happy to visit the woman with her grandpa. Meeting his granddaughter gave the old man something he had been missing so much for a peaceful old-age family. Now he had people who loved and cared for him, who shared joys and sorrows with him, and who were always there for him in difficult times. It was a reward for all his suffering and hardships, for his entire life dedicated to serving his country. It was his peaceful sky, for which Ignacio had given his life. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.